Hello and welcome to episode 295 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, how are you doing?
I'm good, Andy. It's an exciting show this week. We're doing something very different to the norm, actually. So I've been really pumped about doing this particular show. So it does mean that you're going to obviously take a step to one side because we're going to be interviewing somebody. So as much as you've just done the intro for us, Andy, I'm going to say goodbye to you, and then
that's me done.
That's you done for another week. But what we're doing on this week's show is a piece about protection. So when we talk about protection, we're talking about things like insurance, income protection, life insurance, critical illness. So the whole host of policies that come under this title of protection. And now what happened this week, which was quite interesting, is that Harvey, who is our protection editor at Money to the Masses, and she joined in the last month or so, and she was invited onto the Money Box show. So Paul Lewis on a Saturday afternoon does one of the biggest shows on Radio 4 focused on money, and he had a piece on there about, unfortunately, a person whose life insurance policy wasn't paying out when they've been diagnosed with a terminal illness. If you want to listen to the nuance of that, then go and find that show. But of course, what it does is it feeds into this narrative that insurance companies don't like to pay out. And if you went and looked at some of the tweets that followed that show, and particularly Paul Lewis's tweet about that show, there are lots of people being very scathing of insurance companies and saying they're just trying to grab money and it's a waste of time. Well, obviously, as a personal finance podcast, what we do is we talk about all areas of finance. And one of the areas we obviously talk about is insurance. It could be health insurance, like I said, or the other products. And the difficulty is that people view them as a product, but without the full story as to what's going on and the importance of them and what they can do for people. So what we've done is this week I'm interviewing a wonderful person called Emma Thomson, who I actually know personally from my own background. We used to work together many years ago. And Emma's going to tell us her story and is going to share it with us. And her story is from somebody who used to work, obviously, well, not say used to, she still does, in the insurance industry, and unfortunately was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so she's going to talk to us about that whole journey and the sort of fallout from that, and the sort of part, the important part, that the protection policies that she had in place and the learnings herself from that period had, and the impact. Because it's only when you have case studies like these that bring things to life and people can relate to, that I think they have a real impact. It's okay for me and Andy to talk about protection and talk about the benefits of them, but it's only when you hear somebody who shares their story. Now, before I bring Emma onto the show, I'm going to just tell you about Emma. Emma is somebody who I have huge respect for, because way before Money to the Masses was even a thing, I'm talking about probably 10 years before I even started writing that first blog post, I worked with Emma, and Emma really championed me in my early career. So everybody has somebody who they remember fondly for when they entered an industry, and that person was really championing their cause. I remember winning awards that Emma was the person who had to judge upon the panel, and I've never forgotten that, because there are lots of people you meet in an industry and throughout your career who are complete arses, let's be frank. But every now and then there's somebody who helps to shape your career and guide you along the way. So that's why this story has obviously particular importance, and I wanted to share it. And so I'm going to introduce Emma after that sort of lengthy introduction. So Emma, welcome to the show.
Hi, Damien. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that very lovely introduction. It was a long time ago that we worked with each other, but yes, it was good times. Well, you, me, and Andy all working together, actually.
Yeah, but that was the other thing, because obviously Emma is a good friend of Andy, because I met Andy working for that particular company at that time, was the same time as Emma, and I think Andy could correct me on this if I'm wrong. I think Emma may have interviewed Andy for a job at that time before I even worked there. I think Andy might have disappeared off the podcast, but if he's still in the background, is that true?
I think I did give Andy the job, yeah.
Emma, you did. And do you know what, Damien, may I thank you for letting me back on the podcast. I didn't think I'd get another chance to talk, but you've done it. Yes, and I would also like to echo Damien's comments, because Emma was hugely influential and inspirational in my early career in an industry that I wasn't familiar with. And it's lovely to have a guiding hand, a positive voice, and someone who you can bounce ideas off. And Emma was that person for me. And like you say, she gave me my job, my opportunity into that industry. And I honestly believe that I wouldn't be sat here right now on this podcast if it wasn't for someone like Emma. So anyway.
I'm so touched, guys, really.
So, I mean, we've gone full circle. So, I mean, let's kick off the podcast and let's go straight to the point of the diagnosis. If you could fill in the story around that beginning part.
Yeah, sure. So it all really started, I guess, in March, April time last year. So still relatively recent. I, as you do, was flicking through social media and, for very good reasons. Lots of people are quite critical about social media and rightly so. It's not all good. But for me, I'll be forever thankful for flicking through Facebook that day because I saw an image through a breast cancer organisation, and that campaign is called Know Your Lemons. And I happened to see a really bright yellow image with 12 lemons sitting in an egg carton, and each lemon represented the changes that somebody might experience in their breast that could indicate cancer. Now, most of us would automatically think about lumps and bumps, but actually there's so much more that could actually indicate cancer. And I saw that lemon and one of the lemons and I thought that's me, better get checked out. So I went along to the doctor. I got a referral relatively quickly. I can't remember what the time frame was now, but it was really quickly. And I went along to my local hospital, Lincoln County Hospital, in the April last year. And I just thought, to be perfectly honest, that I'd rock up and have the tests and then go home, and then my doctor, my GP, would contact me for the results. I never expected to have any results given to me back on that day. So I went by myself. I hadn't told anybody that I was going. I didn't want to worry anybody. My dad had just gone through a really bad period in his health, so I certainly didn't want to worry them. They'd gone through enough already. So I just thought I'll rock up. And the fact that I didn't have any cancer in my family, I wasn't overly worried either. But as it turns out, I went from test and scan to another test to another scan. I kept going back into the waiting room, and then they kept taking me out for another one. And then they called me again from the waiting room and took me into a room with sofas and cushions. And I just thought, right, well, that's that. I don't think I'm going to get good news here. And I didn't, and whilst they couldn't give me the proper diagnosis, because obviously it was really soon and they still needed to do the full tests, they did tell me that I had cancer, which obviously was devastating news, particularly receiving it by yourself. But for somebody who works in our industry, what was really, really interesting to me was when the breast care nurse was talking through what the next steps were and how I was feeling and what questions I might have had and all of that. They were lovely. There were two of them. They're really nice. But one of the key questions that they asked was, am I worried about money? What sick pay do I have? And because I work in the industry, I was very fortunate that I didn't have to worry about money. I knew I had insurances in place and I could say that, I'm okay. So then all my focus just needed to be on my health. I wasn't walking out of that room, which clearly a lot of other ladies and gentlemen have done, worrying about money as well as the devastating news that they've just received.
Emma, on that point, obviously your world just got turned upside down at that point.
Yeah.
But then if you had that to worry about on top of that, that would have been, you could only imagine how painful that must be for people who have to do that as well as having had that diagnosis.
It would have been awful. I was so fortunate anyway, because I do work in the industry and I also work for a very good employer. So as soon as I told British Friendly what was going on, that's the insurance company I work for. From that moment on, they just said, don't worry about work. Go home, process that information. Obviously they were devastated that I'd given them that call, but at least I was then thinking, right, what do I need to do? And I had another appointment the following week, which is where I would have gone back to find out what the exact diagnosis was, to meet my surgeon and then to progress things. So I was lucky that things did move quite quickly, and they moved faster because when I did meet the surgeon the following week, they did confirm the diagnosis. At that point, they thought that I had a grade 2 invasive cancer. As it turns out, it was actually grade 3 invasive cancer. But at that time, they were then talking about what the procedure would be. And I met my surgeon for the first time. And in a way, and I will say lucky quite a few times during this podcast, but I was lucky that my surgeon didn't feel that I needed a full mastectomy, which obviously is a big thing. So when you first get told you've got breast cancer, everything goes through your mind. You go think about chemotherapy, you think about losing your breast. And obviously for women, that's a really big thing. That's part of your identity. So I was lucky that my surgeon didn't think that he had to go down that road. But until you're literally on the operating table, there's no guarantee. But one thing I did have is when I spoke to my surgeon that day, I said I've got private medical insurance. So it wasn't just the fact that I had other protection insurances, which we'll talk about, but also the fact that I had PMI. So that enabled him to pretty much, so it was the 2nd of May that I met with him. And then I literally had my operation on the 17th of May. It happened that quickly. And that would have happened because I had my PMI. And you just want things to be turned around quickly when you've got cancer. You don't want any delays.
I mean, that turnaround, that timescale from the point that you said, well, you first checked yourself and then you went through to the point where you're obviously, like you're saying, having treatment was so quick in terms of like your world changing that there's no time to prepare for anything like that, is there? It's actually there if you're just reacting to a situation that's unfolding that you have no control over.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is one of those things. I mean, there's so many serious illnesses that people can get, but cancer, it's that word that everyone just dreads hearing. And yeah, I mean, pretty much from going to see my GP to being on the operating table was probably about no more than 6 weeks. So it did happen really quickly. But as I said, I just had to worry about my health. And, and as you said, Damien, I've worked in this industry for many years. So for the best part of 20 years, I've been trying to help consumers get insurances in place. And the key message has always been, these insurances help you to recover. They give you financial security and they help you so that you just have to worry about your health. You're not having to worry about your money. And then I'm literally in that position where it is absolutely so true. It's not just something that we've been saying. It really is so true. And it's not like I didn't have all the insurances that I probably should have done, being honest. Everyone has a budget. So you have to work within your budget. But what I did have was certainly enough for me not to worry about what my financial future was going to be. I had, as I said, I had a great employer, which wasn't putting any pressure on me at all to return to work. But I also had that private medical insurance in place to make sure that I had treatment, and they gave me really good support as well. They were brilliant. They literally told me within 20 minutes on the phone that my claim would be paid, which was fantastic. That's all the reassurance you need when you're in that awful situation. And then after that, sorry, carry on.
Sorry, no, I was going to say, and after that, you then obviously had a period of treatment, didn't you? That must have gone on for a period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had that first surgery on the 17th, but in between I'd gone to as it was a private hospital I went to. So I had a number of consultations in the lead up to that. I then had the surgery on the 17th and then, I was bandaged up. So I had to go back regularly to have my dressings changed. So every week I was going back to have my dressings changed and to liaise with my surgeon. I also met my oncologist as well to talk about future treatment plans. So whilst I'm not saying I wouldn't have had care on the NHS, that's not the case at all, but it did certainly help me have that reassurance that I was having treatment as quickly as it could have been. And I've talked to ladies, in my cancer support group who haven't unfortunately had as good as experience as I have because they have been relying on the NHS, which, let's face it, it's massively under strain. So for me, I just had that, I guess, a more reassuring experience, I suppose. I just felt more in control about what was happening. And also, not being funny, it was a nicer environment to sit in when you're going through a really difficult time. I wasn't having to sit in a massive, great big waiting room. It was just a nicer experience, to be perfectly honest. And I know that I'm very fortunate to be able to have had that. But if you can get it, then I would definitely recommend you do it. Definitely has helped me and it's paid out thousands.
One of the things, Emma, actually, on that point is that this is a really interesting dynamic because obviously we touched upon the medical insurance that helped you through your journey of treatment. And there is obviously from the financial perspective in terms of your own income and sort of payouts to be able to cope with life, basically, once you've had that kind of diagnosis. Could you run me through those? Because it was quite an interesting story, part of your story, because you were actually changing jobs just around this period at the same time, weren't you?
Yeah, so I'd been at my previous employer for over 18 years, so I hadn't had any need to worry about changing jobs. But when I did hand my notice in, I then started thinking, right, well, what is the situation with my insurances? When I reviewed what I had, I realised that I needed to take out more cover. The primary reason being is that by changing jobs, a lot of people in their probation, if they're lucky enough to move to a company that has employee benefits, chances are during your probation period, at least some, if not all of them, you're not eligible for. So I would be losing the group PMI scheme that I had. I had death in service and I also had a group income protection scheme. So whilst I did have some personal provision in terms of life cover and critical illness cover, that wouldn't have been enough. And I was really conscious that, I didn't want to have 6 months of no cover. And a lot of people, let's face it, would have just gone, it's only 6 months. What can happen in 6 months? Well, I'm a walking, talking example of what could happen in 6 months, because pretty much 6 months after I left, it was probably just before that, that's when I went to the GP. Now, if I hadn't have had cover, I wouldn't necessarily have been able to get any coverage at all through my group scheme. So it's definitely worthwhile looking at what cover you've got. One, to make sure that you are regularly reviewing it. I should have reviewed mine years before I did. So I'm holding my hands up. I'm definitely not perfect. It's just
Are you the plumber? Are you the plumber, yeah. Emma, that has the terrible bathroom?
The drippy tap. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. A lot of us in our industry, and industries, whatever it may be, we're very good at talking to clients and customers about what's best for them, but we don't always take our own advice. So I'm very lucky in a way that I changed jobs when I did, because it did prompt me to change my cover. So I would still have been able to have some insurances in place. That's not to say I didn't have anything at all, but I'm certainly better off financially, and there's less financial worries for me because I did actually review cover at that point. And given the current climate, there's going to be a lot of people changing their jobs, moving from employed to self-employed. There's going to be people that are moving from a job, even if they're going from employed to employed, they might be moving from one employer who has got group schemes to an employer that doesn't, or that hasn't got as good a coverage. And also, there's going to be employers that, because of the current climate, they're going to be looking at their cost base, and they could be scaling back some of the group schemes and the coverage that they currently offer their staff. So it's really important for people to actually think about what cover they do get through their employer, but also what personal provision they've got, because the beauty about personal provision is that you've got control over it. So when I left my old company, I transferred the group scheme into an individual scheme for my PMI. So I carried on that cover, but then just paid the premiums myself.
So that was your medical insurance, the PMI?
That was my medical insurance, yeah. And then my income protection. So effectively, if I'm off sick, this is the insurance that's going to pay out. That's what I would have had as a group scheme under my old company, but I was going to lose that. So I took out my own personal cover, and I also topped up my critical illness cover. I had an old critical illness cover policy, but it was pretty low. So I topped up that cover. So in the end, I was actually able to make 2 critical illness claims, because cancer is a critical illness. So I had 2 insurance policies to be able to claim on. I had the private medical insurance to help me as well with my recovery, and it's still helping me now. And I also had the income protection to kick in. Now, as it turns out, I actually then qualified for the group income protection scheme with my employer, but I haven't cancelled my individual cover, because if anything should happen to me now, it's really difficult for me to get any type of insurance now I've got my cancer diagnosis. So even though I am doubling up, so to speak, and some people might think, well, that's a bit of a waste of money, I'm keeping my income protection scheme, because if anything should happen to me, if ever I should want to change jobs, or if the scheme changes at work or whatever it is, I'm not saying it's going to, and I have no intention of changing jobs either, but it just enables me to have flexibility going forwards. And I know that cover is always going to be there for as long as I pay that premium.
Yeah. So, just to give people a quick recap. So obviously I said we talked about the PMI, so that's the private medical insurance, and we know what that does. The income protection policies, as Emma explained, will pay out to replace your income or a portion of your income in the event that you are unable to work, usually due to like accident or sickness. And of course, critical illness cover is normally paid out upon diagnosis of a specified list of critical illnesses. So for example, in Emma's case, breast cancer, and then that would normally give you a lump sum that you can then use how you want to, but that policy then is effectively then ceases because you've had the payout. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of those policies, they are on a joint basis with life cover. So once the critical illness is paid out, the life cover ceases as well. So I had 2 life or earlier critical illness policies. So my life cover provision for those 2 policies has disappeared because the critical illness paid out. But I do have a separate life cover policy that I took out best part of 20 years ago. So that's still running. So I have got that provision on top of the death in service that I've got as well.
So what your example beautifully demonstrates is like each of those products. I know not everybody will be able to necessarily have all of those or afford them, and they may place place different priorities on them. But what you've illustrated is what they all can do. So you had the earlier payment of the critical illness part, so you got the money, the lump sum up front, and we'll come on to what you did with that actually, because there's some interesting stories to that. And so the life insurance part is no longer payable or relevant, but the income protection made sure you had an income to live off, because obviously technically if you're unable to work through sickness, then you need to replace your income, because your sick pay at work, I'm not talking about Emma in particular here, but like more generally, won't necessarily cover you beyond a particular period of time, and then you've got to find the money to be able to pay all your various bills, and obviously the medical insurance helped with the treatment. Emma, going on to your life after you had the payments, what did you do with them? How did they actually help? Because I think it's hard for people to visualize what life looks like when you've had treatment of cancer, for example. Like what are the nuances that you just never thought you'd have to pay out for?
So a lot of people don't understand or realise there is an added cost to being sick. And Macmillan Cancer, for example, they estimate that added cost for cancer patients is £570 a month. Now, for some people, it's going to be more than that, and for others, it's going to be less. But things like you might need to pay for a taxi to get to a hospital, or to your other appointments, you might have to get a taxi to pay for your children to get to school because you're not able to drive anymore. In my particular case, it wasn't quite as serious that, because I was lucky that I had my parents who lived close to me, so they were able to take me to the hospital appointments, and I had a friend who was able to fill in when my mum couldn't take me. But if they hadn't been there, I wasn't able to drive for months, so I had to rely on them, and if it hadn't had them, I would have had to pay for taxes, which obviously does add up. I had to pay for hairdressers I know that sounds ridiculous, but I had to pay for my hair to be washed because I couldn't get in a shower, and because of my injury, because of my surgery, I couldn't bend over a bath or a basin to actually wash it by hand. So that was, having my hair washed twice a week, which adds up. I had to pay for somebody to walk my dog. I had friends and family that helped, but she needs walking twice a day, and I wasn't always able to get somebody to be able to do that. So there's all these added costs, and and other people might have to engage a cleaner or childcare or all sorts of things. So these insurance policies aren't just there to replace the income that you had lost to cover your normal bills. To some extent, they're also there to help pay for those added costs while you're trying to recover. And for some people, unfortunately, they're never going to be able to recover, and these insurances can help to pay for all sorts of things. For example, it may be that their house needs renovation to be able to enable them to live downstairs. I mean, that's just one simple example, but there's a number of things, which is why they do have a different purpose. And income protection is there to try and replace your income when you get sick. Critical illness is there that you can use that as it's a lump sum to pay off your mortgage, or to put to one side to pay for those added cost expenses. And and that's one of the things that I did pay off some of my mortgage with one of my policies. I mean, I live by myself, I'm single, so I don't have anybody else to help pay the bills. And also, as I said, I don't know really what the future's going to bring in terms of potential added costs that I might have going forward. And I can't get any more insurance anymore, so I've just got to be careful with money, because who knows what might happen. I might get cancer again, I might have a stroke, I might have a heart attack, I might get run over. It's really awful to think about these things, but unfortunately we're not all going to live long and healthy.
But one of the things you point out there, Emma, which I think is really relevant, and I'd also like people to take away from this, is that I think if people were to look at some of the protection solutions out there, so whether they need life insurance or, like you say, income protection, whatever, they need to review the suite of products that are available to them. But they always, I think, picture the sort of 2.4 children, perfect family kind of, they're the people with like a house and all this kind of stuff that are the people who need to think about protecting their lifestyle that they've got. But of course, as you said, that you are single and you don't have children. But of course, this has had a massive impact on your life. And so the protection still had a huge benefit for you that's helped you to be able to cope with this period of your life that if you didn't have it, it would have been much more difficult. And I think that's one thing that I think I'd like people to take away, is just to realise that within your story, which you're kindly sharing, Emma, there's so many nuances that I think people overlook, and they're just slightly almost dismissive. Oh, that's not me. There'll be a point in my life where I'll do that kind of thing. I'll take out those policies and review it. But it really is now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at adverts on TV, there's somebody with a child, normally a guy with a child, a dad with a child, and he calls up and there's a woman with a headset, you must protect your family kind of thing. And whilst absolutely people need to protect their families and themselves, and when it comes to income protection, it's not all about protecting families. And I just think that sometimes is just taken a bit too literally in terms of protecting families. It needs to be protecting individuals, because lots of people, regardless of their situation, whether they're a single parent, whether they're single like me with no kids, whether they're in a couple without any children, they will have, a protection need in most situations. And I think what's really good as well, that a lot of people don't quite realise, is that actually insurance is a lot cheaper than you think. And the younger you take it out, the cheaper it is. And as I said, one of my policies I'd had for a long time, and I'd taken that out in 2001, and I was in my mid-20s, a long time ago now. But I was paying £13 a month for critical illness then, which wasn't a huge amount. I wasn't earning a huge amount at that point, but I took out the insurance and I just carried on paying it. If I'd have waited until my 30s or early 40s, it would have been a lot more to do that. So, even if you haven't got a need at that point, I had no mortgage, I had no children, didn't know whether I was going to have any children at that point, but I took it out because you just don't know what's around the corner. And it could be that your situation changes. All I'm saying is, if you can find £15-20 a month, and there's lots of policies and there's lots of cover out there for most people that they can take out for £20-25 a month. As I said at the start, it's not going to be necessarily everything you're going to need. As I said, I didn't have everything. I didn't have critical illness to pay off my full mortgage, for example, but I did have enough to pay off some of my mortgage that would reduce my costs. And it's all about just trying to fit something in with your budget. And if you can speak to an advisor who can give you some free advice, and most advisors, you'll be able to find a protection advisor that can give free advice, they'll be able to search the market for you and find out what can fit within your budget.
In the show notes, because there'll be people listening to this podcast now who will be motivated. So we will put some links in the podcast so people can actually make some progress for this themselves if they want to review things. I suppose one of the key points that you made there is that you can get a solution that suits your budget, and these things need to be reviewed. So you therefore might not be able to have everything covered how you would want to. And I'm an example, like everybody, of that. But then you do enough, you optimize your budget for what you want to prioritize. Can you just say something on the claims process, Emma? Because what was that like actually making the claim? Because so many people give it in the press just want to almost make out that you're never going to get paid out insurance, and that's just not true, is it?
It's not true. I mean, across the board for protection cover for life, income protection and critical illness, you're looking at 98-99% payout rate. You do hear some very sad stories of policies that haven't paid out. That's true. We can't get away from that. But the vast majority do get paid out. And I'm obviously living proof that I haven't just had one payout. I've had 3 pays out, actually 4, including the group IP scheme that I had. So I think for me, what was really important is that I had somebody else, particularly on my PMI scheme. I had a case manager, and they were brilliant. They kind of held my hand throughout the process. And there are also added benefits that you can actually have. Sometimes you don't even need to actually physically have a proper claim in terms of being seriously ill to be able to actually benefit from a lot of these insurance policies. So a lot of insurance covers now include things like virtual GP service. So we know that NHS is under strain at the moment. If you're struggling to see your normal doctor, you can use a 24/7 virtual GP service that you might have through your insurance policy. You might be able to access counselling or physiotherapy, for example. One of the things that I was able to benefit from when I did make my claim is one of my critical illness covers had access to a second medical opinion service. And I used that. So whilst I was happy with my surgeon, my oncologist, not so much, being honest, he wasn't necessarily the best, but my surgeon was, that's another story, but my surgeon was absolutely brilliant. So I didn't really want a second medical opinion service because I didn't trust them. It was just about the fact that this second medical opinion service will literally send off my medical records to the best specialist in the world that they can find. I mean, if you've got that service, you might as well use it. And a lot of insurance companies do offer that now. And that came back recommending that I have the BRCA test, which is the one that Angelina Jolie had, for those of you that might remember. And she had that test to indicate her chance of having breast cancer. And I had that test to indicate the chance of me having breast cancer again. And thankfully, that was another kind of little hurdle to get through. But I sent off my sample and the results came back. And thankfully, it came back showing that I was at no extra risk of having breast cancer than anybody else just because I've had it. So I wouldn't have had access to that without having that through my insurance policy. So my critical illness insurance policy enabled that to that recommendation to be made. And then the actual BRCA test itself was paid for by my private medical insurance. So those two policies really helped give that extra sense of peace of mind for me. But The whole point about this whole sort of like cancer and claims experience is that you go through a number of hurdles. So the first thing is obviously making the claim, is it going to pay out? And I said both of my critical illness covers did pay out. They looked after me nicely, they treated me sympathetically, the money paid out relatively quickly.
Were you ever worried at any point after the diagnosis that are they going to pay out? Were you honestly?
No, I wasn't. And I think obviously I'm lucky that I've got that extra expertise, sort of, insight into what cover I had. So I knew that the one that I'd taken out in 2001 would definitely pay out, and pay out quickly, because if you've had a policy in place for a long period of time, they're not really going to, certainly with something when you're claiming for something like cancer, they're not going to be wanting to write to your doctor for lots of information about other things. All I needed to do really was send in the letter from my breast care surgeon confirming my diagnosis, and that was enough for them. The other policy, which I'd taken out in the October, so only sort of 6 months before, just over 6 months before, I wasn't worried about them paying out, but I did wonder how long it would take them in terms of just assessing it. But actually, they looked at the evidence that I provided, and they did pay out pretty quickly in the end. So sometimes a claims assessor will need to write to the GP just to find out what the medical history is and to get a more rounded picture about the medical situation. But I guess in my case, because it was quite clear cut in terms of the diagnosis, they didn't need to. So I was lucky in that respect that I didn't need to worry. But obviously, if it had been a more minor cancer or something else, then yeah, you kind of, I say, there's always a bit of, not is it going to pay out, but I guess for me it was more about, as I said, when is it going to pay out rather than if. Because as I said, most of these policies, they do pay out. They are there for when people get sick and injured.
It's a whole different ballgame from being sat in that room as you described and had the nurse asked you about, were you worried about your finances, being in a position where you would have had to say yes. Do you mean that would be a whole different ball game, isn't it, than just being wondering when the insurance is going to pay out? Moving on from that, because you're saying about those payouts, I want to talk about a particular purchase you made, right? And as a result of this, as a result of all this, because I want people to be, obviously, it's a fantastic story, and I want people to hear one part of your story, which sort of, it just brought a smile to my face when I saw it on Instagram. And I think you called it, and I know we're going to make this podcast that it's sort of technically X-rated, but I think it's technically called a it purchase, isn't it? I think you said. Apologies to Andy.
No. It was my sod it purchase, whatever you want to call it, my bit of a crazy purchase. I mean, at the time I was being diagnosed, I was actually in the middle of adopting my Cocker Spaniel as well. So it was quite an eventful time. My first worry actually wasn't about money. It was about, do I carry on adopting Molly, who needed a home? She was 1 year old and she'd been given up. But, I carried on with that. But as I was driving back from the hospital on the 2nd of May, when I had that formal diagnosis after meeting the surgeon, I went past the garage that I normally take my car to. And a few weeks previously, I'd been in there getting it serviced, and I'd seen a camper van, a VW California camper van, which I thought was rather fabulous. But I just thought, no, that's not a necessary purchase. That's just too frivolous, and it's too expensive. So I just thought, maybe one day. But as I was driving back on the 2nd, I saw it and it was still in the showroom, and I knew that I was going to be getting a critical illness payout. And I did just think, bugger it, I need something to keep me going. And it's really important to have that positive attitude when you're trying to recover. So I went and I test drove it, and I pretty much bought it on the spot.
It's a thing of beauty. I've seen pictures of the thing. It is amazing. We might have to share one with the listeners, because it is a thing of beauty, this camper van, because it's one of the ones where the roof actually lifts up as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's got, and it's the proper VW factory fitted one, and I said it's called a VW California. I can definitely recommend having a camper van, so definitely look it up. But at the garage, I explained the situation. I said, look, I will have the money coming to me at some point. They were like, fine. And I told them as well about when my surgery date was going to be, because I just said I'm not going to be able to pick it up after that point, but my mum will be able to drive it. And they said, and the guy was like, no, we will have this for you the day before so you can pick it up. He said, I want you to drive away in this. And bless them, they did.
That's
and
cool.
I knew I wasn't going to be able to swim for ages. And near me, there's a fabulous outdoor swimming pool. So I picked up the van. I drove half an hour to this outdoor swimming pool. It was a beautiful day, and I had a lovely afternoon. Just me, the camper van, and swimming, because I just thought I'm not going to be able to drive for weeks and weeks and weeks. I'm not going to be able to swim for months. So that's kind of what I did. And yeah, I'm just so thankful that I was able to do do that. And I know that's certainly not something that an advisor would ever talk about when they're recommending a policy. Take out insurance, you might be able to buy a camper van. But it is about your mental well-being as well. And as I said, for me, it was about having something positive to focus on. And when I came out of recovery and when I was able to start driving again, I did go out for very short day trips. And then I got a little bit further and I was able to then, I drove half an hour down the roads and I had like a one night away camping trip and that kind of thing. And, and I was able to take Molly, who came to live with me a week after my surgery. So I had Molly that obviously kept me going. And, she makes me laugh every day. She's a cheeky Cocker Spaniel. And the camper van is brilliant. And, this time last year, I had driven to Germany and I had no plans of what to do other than I'm just going to drive to Germany. My French is rubbish, so I wanted to speak a bit of German. So as long as I got some sort of Germanic speaking country, I was fine. But I ended up going to Switzerland and Austria and Liechtenstein and, Belgium, and just me and Molly for 11 days, and it was awesome. And and I've done lots of other trips since.
I just like the idea of you and this dog traveling Europe. It's like a children's book.
But it is the old, saying, life is too short. And when something like this happens to you, you do think, yeah, life is too short and you've got to make the most of it. And I used the word lucky earlier, and I have been lucky. As I said, I didn't have to have a mastectomy. I was really fortunate in that I didn't need to have chemo. There's lots of people that have sadly had to have that, and it's awful. I just had to have radiotherapy, which in itself can be a challenge. I'm now on 10 years worth of tamoxifen, which has a risk of a whole manner of side effects. Touch wood, so to speak. I'm okay at the moment. I've got to have a mammogram every year. So every year you've got this another hurdle to get through. Is it going to be okay? Is it going to be okay? And then you just got all those tests, like the BRCA test, that they had the biopsy when I got out of my original operation. Did they get everything? Do they need to operate again? And I have been lucky in that, given this has been a really difficult time, it could have been so much worse. And I do keep saying that it could have been worse. It could have been worse. And it's absolutely true. It definitely could have been worse, but it also could have been a hell of a lot better. That's for sure. But, I've come through it. And that's the beauty of these insurance policies. A lot of people say insurance is a waste of money. It's a waste of time. It's not going to pay out. There's lots of ifs, buts and maybes. And yeah, there are terms and conditions. Like most things in life, there are terms and conditions, but ultimately most of them do pay, and we're able to help people in a real time of need. And I've been helped at a real time of need.
Yeah, and of course, it's also, this whole podcast goes some way to answering the question you hear people say, well, why should I pay for like these insurances? I'm better off just saving up the premiums. And of course, the idea is you don't want to have to claim on these insurances. That's kind of the point of them. But unfortunately, there does come a point where for some people they have to. And this is the difference that they can make. So I think it's a great case study, really, for somebody who is in the industry. Like, there was so many points where it could have gone the wrong way for you in terms of the protection part. Like you said, when you left a job, you could have not reviewed it, and then you would have been in a very different position to where you are today. And I just think, as a whole, I think I just thank you for sharing the story, Emma. I mean, it's been, for people listening to this, will be just in awe of you. I mean, I can't personally wait till the whole COVID thing finishes, and then we can probably meet up again and have a drink and stuff, and a big hug, and then we can all chat again, and rather than being stuck at the end of a microphone. But it is the world we're in now.
I know, but it is about trying to turn a negative experience into a positive. And lots of people listening to this will either not potentially have heard of a lot of these policies, or if they have, they've dismissed them as not important. And you're not alone. For years, I've been trying to get friends and family to make sure that they're adequately protected, so they've got that financial safety net in place. And some of them have, but a lot of them haven't. But since I got cancer, let's just say a lot more of my friends and family have taken out cover, that's for sure. And it shouldn't have to have taken me to get cancer to actually persuade them of the benefits. But it's very easy to prioritise other things in life. We don't want to have to claim on these things. We don't want to get sick. But that's why I wanted to make the point about those added benefits, because you don't have to properly claim on these to still be able to get something back from them. There's lots of policies now that have these added benefits. British Fenner's own products, they've got added benefits. We even have a quarterly prize draw for our members, so you can sometimes get something back for your premiums without actually having to fall sick.
Yeah.
But it is really important to review your situation, that's for sure. And there are so many great advisors out there that can offer you free non-obligation advice as well. But at the very least, for me, have a conversation, find out how much things are going to cost, and then make an informed decision about what's important for you. I think that's probably my most important message.
So following that message, what we're going to do at the end of, in the show notes of this podcast, we'll put in links to explainers about all those policies you would have heard us mention, just so you can read a bit more about them. And also, like I say, where you can go to find out a bit more or speak to somebody for free advice. And it's a person that we would recommend. One other thing I want to mention, right at the beginning of the podcast, Emma talked about that particular graphic that was the image of the lemons that was obviously instrumental in this whole story. And I remember I first saw that, Emma, when you shared it on Facebook. And then I went home and showed it to my wife. So we're going to obviously include that in the show notes and everything, in the image of this particular show, because obviously you're proof that it's just so important.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it might be a bit extreme to say it saved my life, but I just don't know. I don't know, I just wouldn't have necessarily put two and two together and realised that I might have had cancer without it. And it is such a powerful image, so simple. And I've seen lots of other sort of images, drawings of people and drawings of boobs, and, it just doesn't have the same impact. Whereas 12 lemons in an egg box, whoever dreamed that up was a genius, because, and potentially a lifesaver, most importantly. So know your lemons, go and check it out and share it with people.
And I've just been sitting there in the background, Emma and Damien, listening to the story. And I have to say, I'm in total awe of you. One of the things that I've heard on the grapevine on these kind of things is there's one question that people tend to avoid asking where people have suffered an illness. And I just wanted to ask that question because I've heard from personal experience, it's the one question people don't ask. And so I just wanted to ask, how are you? How are you feeling? How are you doing? Because I do hear it, that it's that one question that people don't want to ask because they don't want to broach the subject. They don't know what the answer will be. And I think sometimes they're awkward to ask it. But I genuinely want to know, how are you? Are you okay? And I don't mean in terms of your diagnosis and your recovery. I just mean in general.
No, in general, I'm fine. I mean, last year was obviously a difficult year. And one thing I haven't actually said is how long I was actually out of the workplace for. I mean, as I said, so pretty much end of April last year, I did go back to work for a very short period in November. And then I was off again with another surgical procedure, which was part of my cancer recovery. And I returned to work properly in January. So I'm okay. I've been back at work since January, ignoring COVID if we can. It's actually been fine. It's been good to get back to work, obviously. And it's been good to get out and do things until obviously then the coronavirus kicked in. But apart from that, no, I'm doing okay. Thanks, Andy. I still, as I said, you can't get away from it. I am, as I said, I take tablets every day for it. I've got to have a regular mammogram. I had that a couple of months ago and that thankfully came back clear. But you just don't know what's around the corner. But I'm lucky that I've had so much support from family and friends and colleagues. It's been amazing. And I think that's one of the biggest positives that I've had out of this, just how amazing and lovely people have been and so supportive. But I think it is difficult sometimes to ask somebody how they are. But it's important to do so because it does mean an awful lot to them. Even if it's really difficult for them to tell you how they are, the fact that you've asked it will go a long way.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I just want to echo Damien's comments on thanking you once again for sharing your story. I think it will help thousands of our listeners. And again, thanks for doing that. So that was Emma talking about her journey of recovery and how important these kind of products are: income protection, critical illness, life insurance, private medical insurance. We'll put links to it in the podcast as well. So that's it for this week. If you want to get in touch, you can do so. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Twitter, it's at moneytothemasses with a number 2. Don't forget, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and you can join our Facebook group. It's facebook.com/groups/moneytothemasses.
So, I mean, that is it for this week's show. I think you'll agree it's been a fantastic show. So until next time.
Until next time.